Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with Zaporozhye area. Today we have at least 3 areas of very active clashes from 3 sides, not of clashes but 3 areas of a lot of events. And first we're going to talk about Zaporozhye. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians made a very massive missile strike over this settlement, and as a result of that strike, the Russians managed to destroy a building in the residential area of Zaporozhye. The Ukrainian sources were saying that as a result of that strike, the Russians destroyed the civilian area, and there is no purpose of that attack. But later, the Russians reported that as a result of that attack, not by the Russians, by the Turkish Turkish sources, that as a result of that attack, around 45 mercenaries and volunteers from militants from NATO were killed, and around 70 probably NATO officers or current NATO officers were wounded. So that was attack against the command center of NATO forces in Zaporozhye, according to the Turkish sources. Now we're moving further to the south, and now we're going to discuss the situation in the vicinity of Zhiribyanki. If you remember, during the previous few weeks, we haven't almost received nothing from this area, no updates from both sides, neither from the Russians nor from the Ukrainians. And starting today, the Ukrainians and the Russians start publishing videos from this bridgehead. But the thing is that when talking about this area, the main clashes and the main activity we see from the Russian side. According to the videos and geolocated videos we received, the Russians started their small reconnaissance operations from the south, trying to move in direction of Petykhatki from the settlement like Dalinka and Konovalovka to the north. The Russians were starting their movements from Konovalovka to the north in direction of Mali, Sherbaki. The Russians started their reconnaissance operation in direction of Kamyanska. For example, when talking about Kamyanska, the settlement was under very heavy fire from the side of Russian reconnaissance team. On this video we see that 2 buildings were destroyed, 2 positions of Ukrainian machine gunners, probably of snipers and so on. So we see activity from the Russian side. On this video we can see how the Russians send their reconnaissance squad to the north in direction of Petykhatki. The Ukrainians discovered the movement of Russian forces, and after that they see the Russian platoon that were moving to the north along the trenches, along the forest lines, along the river and so on. They were basically heading in direction of Petykhatki with purpose to destroy Ukrainian forces, and as a result the Ukrainians discovered Russian positions and started bombing them with cluster rounds. So this video you see the usage of the cluster rounds against the Russian platoon that were heading in direction of Petykhatki. On this video we see how the Ukrainians discovered another Russian positions along the forest lines, and as a result of artillery strike they destroyed a local ammo depot of the Russian forces in this area. What is the most interesting? As you can see, we expected that Ukrainians is going to be the side that will try to continue their offensive operation in Zhiribyanki in direction of probably Konovalova or something like this. But after very fierce battles, after very fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians had significant losses. And furthermore, if you remember, the forces of 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, which was the most important, the main power in this area, were completely destroyed and collapsed, and the Ukrainians were forced to move this brigade from the combat line to the north to restore this area, restore these forces. And basically the Ukrainians don't have army, they don't have power to continue active clashes, and the Russians took a decision to use this situation, to use these advantages, and currently they started checking the situation and attacking the Ukrainians with small reconnaissance operations all over the combat line in the vicinity of in the area between Kamyansk and Petykhatki. So I expect another activation, another level of intensifying of action in this area from the Russian side, and probably attempt from the Russian side to counterattack the Ukrainians in Petykhatki with the purpose to force them to step back from this side of the river to the north in direction of Stepova. Anyway, sooner or later we're going to see and understand this. Now we're moving further to the Bradley Square. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates from this area, and probably the most important and the most interesting update is that some Ukrainian soldiers published the photo in the vicinity of Rabotina. This is the road shield. On this road shield is written in Russian or maybe in Ukrainian that this is the settlement of Rabotina. Some of you can think that this shield might be put not close to Rabotina, but maybe somewhere to the north. But I know the rules of the driving rules in this country, and basically this shield can be established. The shields of such a type can be established in 15 meters from the first building of the settlement. So basically the Ukrainians, as a result of fierce fightings in this area that took place during the previous 24 hours, managed to enter the northern part of Rabotina. So that was the reason why I have changed the color of the map, and currently we are showing the northern part of Rabotina as the territory in the gray zone. The Russian sources reported that as a result of counterattack, they managed to repel the Ukrainian movements and to force them to step back. But when talking about the Russians' report, we received just the text confirmations without any video or photo confirmations of that. The only video confirmations that we got, not just video confirmation, but a regular photo confirmation, and this photo is not geolocated, that today the Ukrainians, using 7 armored vehicles and around 60 soldiers, made an attempt to attack in the vicinity of Rabotina, and probably that was the attack that gave the Ukrainians such a success that they managed to enter the northern part. But the Russians are saying that they destroyed the convoy of Ukrainian forces and basically they were forced to step back. So this is the situation we have. And also we got another video from the eastern part of Rabotina. This is the video of rotation process somewhere in the trenches in front of that settlement. So as you can see, the Ukrainians got as close as possible to the Russian positions from the north and from the east. This is the failed attempt to evacuate the Ukrainian troopers. The Russians started attacking the Ukrainian armored vehicle, and the armored vehicle of Ukrainian forces turned back and started running away from these positions, and he forgot to take the infantry of Ukrainian forces. So this is the situation in Rabotina. Also, the Russians published a lot of videos of drone strikes, but mainly all those drone strikes took place somewhere between Rabotina and Verbova, not in the vicinity of Rabotina. So basically the Russians think that this area is more important for them, is more like not like important, but less, it's more, it has bigger value for them to suppress and to destroy the Ukrainian forces in the fields between Verbova and Rabotina, because this is critical bridgehead that Ukrainians can use for further development of their offensive operation in direction of Verbova. So probably this is the reason why the Russians are focused in this area, and that they probably paid less attention to the northern part of Rabotina. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the area between Kamyansk and Rabotina during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system. As you can see, the level of losses is very low, but the main actions about Rabotina took place today. So tomorrow we're going to see the real numbers of the clashes in this area. Now we're moving to the Vremevka tactical bridgehead. Today we also got a lot of updates. The Ukrainians continue attacking the Russian forces in Urozhaina. Basically, the garrison of Russian force in Urozhaina is currently in operational encirclement. The Ukrainians managed to cross the river Mokraya Yale and to establish control over a few buildings and streets on the southern part of that settlement. The Ukrainians captured and hold the northern part of that settlement. The Russians control the area along the main road and the streets on the eastern part of that area. The Russians also published the video how they were bombing the Ukrainian forces in Staromayorska, trying to pin them down and not to allow them to send reinforcements and reserves on this side of the Mokraya Yale river. And the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions on the north with the same purpose, to reduce the level of reinforcements and forces, basically forces that Ukrainians were able to send to the northern part of Urozhaina. Furthermore, during the day, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in the main and the accumulation of Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of Velika Novoselovka that Ukrainians were planning to use for another attempt to attack in the northern part of Urozhaina, and the Russians managed to discover, and as a result of as a result of Cheburashka strike. Cheburashka is a new type of weapon. As you can see, according to this video, this Cheburashka weapon has 2 launching systems on board and 64 4 missiles this system can launch at once. As a result of that attack, the Velika Novoselovka from the south was heavily damaged. The Russians managed to discover and destroy another accumulation of Ukrainian forces. We haven't received any numbers about the losses, but as I understand, the main purpose was just to pin down and to establish fire control over the road that goes from Velika Novoselovska to the south, and just to reduce the Ukrainian mobility, flexibility during the Ukrainian offensive operation to the south. And the most interesting part of that attack, that if we calculate the distance between this area and the closest Russian positions that could be used for that attack, and we see that there is almost 11 from 10 till 15 kilometers between these two areas. So imagine yourself the distance that the Russians can use to attack the Ukrainian positions with this very heavy, the heaviest type of weapon that currently the Russians have on board. Furthermore, the Russians have returned or redeployed back their helicopters in this AK-52, and today we also got a lot of updates how the Russians were tracking the Ukrainian forces, were attacking them, and destroyed a few armored vehicles that were also heading in the direction of Rozhaina. So basically we can see that because of usage of artillery systems, because of usage of Ka-52, the Russians still have possibilities to control this settlement. And basically this is something like a cheese in a trap for mouse. The Ukrainians are trying to attack from the south, from the north, but basically the Russians see the movements. This is a very small bridgehead, and this area is completely under any types of controls, and the Ukrainians are sending more and more reserves to capture the settlement, and every time they send some forces, the Russians destroy them on their move, on their way to in these directions. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the vicinity of on the South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. As you can see, the level of losses is also on the on the lowest level since the beginning probably of the operation of Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive operation. Now we're moving probably to from my perspective, from my point of view, of course, when talking about the situation from the global scope, probably the most interesting areas for everybody is Zaporozhye area. I mean the Bradley Square, Vremivka tactical bridgehead. People are very interested in the battles of this on this area. Of course, Bakhmut and of course Kupin. So like the most areas that people are interested in. But if you ask my opinion, from my perspective, the most interesting part of the combat line is the area between Novomikhailivka and Krasnogorovka. This is, from my perspective, the key region, the key area for the Russians. If they are able to penetrate the defense belt between Novomikhailivka, Marinka, Krasnogorovka, the entire front line of the Ukrainian forces in Velika Novoselovka and Vremivka will be collapsed. And today the Russians continue attacking Novomikhailivka, trying to encircle the settlement from two sides, from the north and from the south. And for the first time, probably since the beginning of this year, we got the first video, video geolocated that confirms that the Russians started offensive operation in direction of Novomikhailivka from the south. The Russians moved their tank on the combat line, and using tank, the Russians started attacking the settlement from the south, trying to suppress, to destroy the Ukrainian strongholds, and just to clear the passage for the infantry that, of course, sooner or later will start a movement from the south to the north. Also, the Russians published the video of another strike inside of the settlement. They managed to discover the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian stronghold, and as a result of missile attack or artillery attack, that stronghold was destroyed. And if we increase the number of updates that we received from this bridgehead, at least for the previous months, we see the level of Russian focus in this area. They're trying to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in this area and to capture. Obviously, this area is the key area for the Russians. Furthermore, today we continue receiving updates from the northern flank of Marinka bridgehead, and I'm talking about Krasnogorovka. Today we got at least 3 updates from this bridgehead. The first one, as we discussed in the previous videos, the video that the Russians, as a result of another wave of offensive operation in the vicinity of coal mine, managed to establish final 100% control over this territory. And there was a video of that, the artillery preparation of that before that offensive operation, and after that the Russians captured this stronghold completely, and currently the Russians are located like in few hundred meters of the first defense belt and positions in Krasnogorovka. We discussed this information, this operation in the past, so nothing new for us. We discussed that if the Russians want to establish control over the settlements, they need to complete at least from 3 to 4 goals, and then they will be able to capture the settlement. Furthermore, today we got the video how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian M777 howitzer that Ukrainians were using to attack the Russians in Marinka, in Krasnogorovka. Like that was like support artillery system, and the Russians managed to discover and destroy, basically to suppress as a result of counter-artillery duels. But this is not the most important update. The third and probably the most important update of today of Krasnogorovka is that the Russians started their offensive operation on the northern flank in this direction. Today there was not a real operation, like there was just the beginning. It was like reconnaissance operation, reconnaissance in force probably, and the video was published by the Ukrainian forces, not by the Russians. The forces of 59th Brigade, this is the 59th Brigade who operates in this area in Nivolska and the northern part of Krasnogorovka, published the videos of Russian attempt to attack the northern part. According to the officer, the Russians sent at least 2 armored vehicles. That was some kind of reconnaissance in force. The Ukrainians, of course, managed to discover those armored vehicles from the Russian side, and basically they destroyed them. But one more time, the main thing is that the Russians started their offensive operation, and of course the main purpose of this operation is to establish control over the, let's say, the eastern fortification positions on the edge of Krasnogorovka, this area. And if you remember, we discussed the Russians have already prepared the bridgehead from the south. Now they can continue offensive operation in direction of the residential area on the south of the railways. The second operation is to capture this stronghold as the coal mine stronghold, and after that they will be able to continue their offensive in Krasnogorovka as well. So the Battle of Krasnogorovka has started. The Russians have completed at least 2 of 4 goals. Currently they're trying to complete the 3rd goal, and the 4th goal was discussed to capture Nivolska, but we haven't received any updates about any attempt from the Russian side to capture the settlement. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 180 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 4 artillery systems. The Russians managed to repel at least 5 attacks from the Ukrainian side. When talking about Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, we haven't received any updates about any attempts from neither the Russians nor the Ukrainian side to attack, to counterattack. The situation is stable. The Ukrainians established drone control over every single supply road that goes to Andreevka, Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye, Klishchevka, and the attacks, and today they attacked more and more armored vehicles from the Russian side, not just armored vehicles, the Russian positions, a lot of videos from the Ukrainian side. Basically, the Russians are pretty successful, was at least in this area. The Russians from their side published a lot of videos how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in Ivanovskaya, on the north of Klishchevka and so on, trying to stretch the Ukrainian forces to pin them down and not to allow them to get to the edge positions in Klishchevka. Very interesting updates are coming from the bridgehead between Berkhovka, Yagidnaya, Bogdanovka in this area. If you remember, the Russians counterattack, they defeated the Ukrainians in this area, and after that the Russians complete the clearing operation of these trenches, but we haven't colored this territory in red color because we haven't received enough of proofs that this area is under Russian control. And today the Ukrainians published the video how they discovered the Russian tank in this area, and as a result of strike that tank was destroyed. So basically, probably this is the first evidence that was published by the Ukrainian forces that this territory maybe is not under full Russian control. Maybe the Russians have possibilities just to send some forces, like not like rear guards, but some forces that can be used as eye positions to discover, to spot, to track Ukrainian movement and to provide information as fast as possible to the main positions in Yagidna and Berkhovka. But anyway, the only thing I can tell that even if this territory is in the gray zone, this territory, there are no Ukrainians at all. This territory is probably under Russian control, and we're going to wait another day and we will receive more updates. Of course, we will color this territory in red color, which means that the Russians returned this area completely under their control. Now we are moving further to Berestova, probably the third area which interests me more than even Battle of Bakhmut. And I'm talking about the railways that goes from Berestova to Siversk. The Russians continue bombing the Ukrainian positions along these railways, trying to destroy as much as possible Ukrainian positions. And basically, this is not the first video from this area. The Russians destroy another, let's say, stronghold. Around 7 Ukrainian soldiers were killed as a result of that strike. But the main thing is that if we increase the number of updates from this area for months, we see the Russian purpose. They're attacking the Ukrainians along the railways. Basically, they're trying to clear the passage for the infantry or armored vehicles and before the next offensive operation. Currently, the Russians already controls this part of the railways, and this is, as you can see, forest line, very massive forest line, which allows the Russians to hide there and so on. So I expect activation of the Russian force along the railways very soon. I'm not saying about the days, maybe months, but anyway, we see the purpose, we see the Russians' purpose, and basically they will try to complete this goal to capture and to clear the railways to the north. And this operation can collapse and ruin the entire flank, entire front line in Siversk. Automatically will be collapsed the front lines in Sporna, Ivano-Darivka, Veselaya, if the Russians are able to continue their movements along the railways. When talking about Tarskoye salient and this area, today we got probably the first update for the last 2 weeks. We got just the text reports from the Ministry of Defense, and finally the Russians published the first video from this area, from the northern part of the Tarskoye salient, which confirms control over this territory by the Russian forces. On this video, according to the author of this video, we see the storming process by the Russians of these trenches, of this forest line, which confirms one more time the Russian control over this territory. The Russian infantry will land on the south, and after that they captured. Yet I don't know when this video was made. This very fresh video of today. This video appeared in the internet just today. But as I understand, the events in this that was described in this video took place maybe today, maybe yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday, but somewhere this week. The Ukrainians were forced to step back, and currently the Ukrainians controls this forest on the north of these forest lines. So this is another area where the Russians activated and intensified the activities in this area, which means that maybe even in Kupiansk we're going to see some operational pause during the next weeks, and the Russians will try to activate their movements in Tarskoye salient as a support operation, trying to force the Ukrainians to send more reserves from Kupiansk to the south. So basically, as you can see, this video where currently I try to focus you on Kamyanskaya, on Novomikhailivka, on Krasnogorovka, on the area between Veselaya and Tarskoye. This is not the primary areas of attacks. This is the secondary areas of attacks. This is the 5 points of pressure that the Russians have created recently, today, yesterday, and this is a very dangerous point of pressure. And if the Ukrainians are not going to stop the Russians on these directions, the entire front lines can collapse. And currently, the Ukrainians have lost significant number of their forces in Zaporozhye, in Vremivka. They have redeployed significant number of their forces to the Kupiansk, and currently the Ukrainians don't have reserves, strategical reserves, to occupy and to repel the Russian attack on these secondary waves in the secondary directions. And this is probably and maybe the main Russian purpose, to freeze, to pin down the main Ukrainian forces, to understand and to see that they are no longer able to use reserves, and after that to start developments of the secondary directions like Tarskoye, Kamyanskaya, Novomikhailivka, Krasnogorovka, and Siversk salient. Who knows? The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, probably including the episode in these forest lines, the Ukrainians lost 115 soldiers. The Russians managed to repel 2 attacks from the Ukrainian side. One attack took place in the vicinity of Kremenaya forest, and another Ukrainian attack took place in the vicinity of Novoyegorovka. The Ukrainians continue making attempts trying to return their positions on this side of Zherebets River, but all attacks were repelled by the Russian forces. When talking about Kupiansk front line, we got a lot of interesting updates. First of all, I would like to talk about the missile, not guided bomb strike against the center, against the like a town hall or like something like this by the Russian forces. As a result of that attack, the town hall or very like local authorities building was destroyed, and the sources are saying that this is the area, this is the building that was visited by General Syrsky recently when he visited Kupiansk before the announcement of evacuation and so on. So basically the Russians shown the General Syrsky that they could kill him while he was there. So he shouldn't be so like he shouldn't think that he was invisible for the Russians. The Russians saw everything, and basically they could kill him then, but they did this strike today, showing this like they can do this. The Ministry of Defense reported as a result of fierce fightings in this area, and the Ukrainians lost 165 soldiers, probably the heaviest level of losses of Ukrainian forces since the beginning of any reports from this area about Russian offensive operation. Also, the Russians continue reporting that they managed to develop their bridgehead on the very broad front line from Sinkovka Alshany in this area, yet we haven't received any official confirmation that Sinkovka fell under Russian pressure. Currently, we understand that this settlement is under Ukrainian control, and the Russians published few videos how they bomb and attack the Ukrainian positions on the Kupiansk front line between, let's say, Kislovka-Kotlarovka and Kupiansk area. So another howitzer was discovered by the Russian forces and destroyed as a result of artillery strike. So as you can see, the situation is very critical. The Russians collapsed, the Russians freezed and pinned down the Ukrainian forces and started attacking on the secondary directions. And basically we see that Ukrainians, they don't have forces to occupy the Russian attacks and to prevent the Russian attacks on the main directions. But what can we say about the secondary direction? Furthermore, the Russians reported that they made Kinzhal strikes on the western part of Ukraine, and some sources are saying that the Russians were trying to destroy the tunnels on the western part of Ukraine that goes under the rocks in this area, and this is the area where the Ukrainians try to hide their Su-24 aircrafts in those tunnels, and missiles and many other things, as they probably the most reliable area that can stand against the Russian missiles or something like this. For now, we haven't received any proofs of that. Furthermore, we got another very interesting update from Belarus, from another Wagner camp. Today the Western sources published the photo of Wagner camps in the territory of Belarus, and they're saying about significant number of armored vehicles, of trucks, of tanks, of different types of weapons that were recently redeployed in the territory of Belarus. And the Western countries don't understand why the Russians took a decision to accumulate such a big power, such a big forces on the territory of this country. Very difficult to understand, and for now we don't have any understanding what is going to be next. Probably maybe the Russians are trying to prepare themselves before the next phase of special military operation in the western part of Ukraine. Furthermore, today we got a very interesting interview from the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda. I believe you've heard that interview. I read that interview, and the most important part of that interview is that why the Western countries need to continue support Ukraine and to fight with Russians. And basically he reported that currently, when talking about this configuration of the war, this war is very cheap. And this war is very cheap because in this war the soldiers of the United States of America are not dying. So basically, according to his words, as soon as the soldiers of the United States of America are going to die, that means that this war is going to become very expensive. But until just Ukrainians are dying, this war is not expensive, and this is the reason why the Western countries need to support and supply Ukraine in the war with the Russian Federation. Very interesting points of view of this president of Poland. So we'll see what is going to be next, of course. And basically, as I understand, we have covered everything for today, and that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.